Hi everyone, my name is Jen and this is B-Sass Plants, where we talk about things houseplants and home design. Welcome back! So today I want to talk to you about one of my favorite plants. This is the Philodendron Brasil. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this cultivar of plant, but today I also want to talk about this plant as well as some of the sport cultivars that this plant has produced, which includes, but is not limited to, the Philodendron Silver Stripe, the Philodendron Cream Splash, and the Philodendron Rio. Alright, let's get into that. Okay, so obviously the first plant that I want to introduce you guys to is my Philodendron Brasil. I'm obsessed with this plant. I talk about this plant all the time. It's been featured in so many of my videos. This is the Philodendron Brasil. This is a pretty widely accessible plant. You can find it pretty much anywhere at big box stores, your local nursery, etc. And this is the most commonly variegated version of the heart-shaped philodendron, or the Philodendron Rio. And this is what the variegation pattern looks like. It's most likely dark green on the outside with some light green on the inside. But like most variegations, this cultivar can include a lot of different varieties of patterns. Like this one is more light green than dark green. This one is kind of like split. Some of the ones down here look a little bit different, but basically as long as it's dark green and light green, it pretty much just encompasses under the Philodendron Brasil name. So then this plant has also ended up producing a lot of different sport cultivars. So you might be like, what is a sport cultivar? Basically, a sport of a plant is any plant mutation that happens, which includes variegation. All variegation at one point or another, it happened as a plant mutation, but obviously over time it has been selected by growers to then be, to produce. So over time that sport becomes more stable and then gets called a cultivar. So this is probably at one point, I'm assuming, also was labeled as a sport, and then over time as it becomes much more stable, it has turned into a cultivar. But this plant has then also mutated several times in several different ways, and all of those different mutations become their own different types of cultivars eventually as they become more stable. Okay, so let's get into all of the difference between the different sport cultivars. So I don't have all of them, but I do have some of them. But the first plant I want to show you, pause. Okay, so the first plant I want to show you is this plant, because I think this is a good example of how sport cultivars happen. This was sold to me as a Philodendron Brasil, and I do think that the majority of this plant does just look like a plain old Philodendron Brasil. Like if you look at leaves like this, that's a Brasil. It's dark green on the outside with light green in the middle. But then if you look at some of the other leaves on this plant, they look a little bit different. Like if you look at this leaf, I would call this a Philodendron Cream Splash. Basically what a cream splash is, it's dark green and then cream, and then it can also have a little bit of light green. So I would call this leaf a cream splash. I would call this leaf a cream splash, right? Where it's basically an almost entirely cream leaf with just a tiny bit of green on the outside. I would call this leaf a cream splash, where it's green and then cream with a little bit of light green. So as you can see, those leaves are mutations, and they probably happened naturally on this Philodendron Brasil. So although this entire plant, I wouldn't call it a cream splash, but if I separated out just these leaves and let them grow over time, if that variegation or if that mutation, you know, stabilizes, I could definitely call that section of the plant the Philodendron Cream Splash or the Philodendron Brasil Sport Cream Splash. So yeah, okay, so let's look at another variegation that is very, very similar to the Cream Splash. I think that this is the hardest differentiation, like the two different sport cultivars that are the hardest to differentiate, and that is the Cream Splash and the Silver Stripe. I think the Silver Stripe is probably the most common sport of the Philodendron Brasil. So let me put down this Cream Splash. This is what I would consider to be a Philodendron Silver Stripe. It was also sold to me as a Silver Stripe. And this is what I feel like the variegation encompasses. So it is light green, cream, and then maybe a tiny bit of silver, like on the outside, and then dark green. So I would call that a Silver Stripe. So once again, light green, cream, a tiny bit of silver, and then dark green. And that variegation is pretty consistent throughout this entire plant. But basically the colors would be light green, cream, and then the silver stripes, and then the dark green, versus the Cream Splash, which is just cream, light green, and then the dark green. So there's no silver in the Cream Splash, and that's what differentiates the silver stripes from the Cream Splash. All right, let me see if I can try to hold them up at the same time. So this right here is the Cream Splash leaves that we talked about earlier, and then this is the Silver Stripe. So they look very, very similar. The only thing that really differentiates them is the fact that one has a silvery color and the other one doesn't. But if you look them like side by side, it is quite similar. So that's why I consider these two the hardest two to tell apart. Okay, and then the last cultivar of the Philodendron Brasil that I have is the Philodendron Rio, or the obviously Philodendron Brasil Sport Rio. This cultivar, or sport cultivar, has been cultivated by Gabriella Plants, but they do not have like a trademark on it or anything, so technically other people can grow this plant and sell this plant. But I have noticed that a lot of plants on the market that's labeled as Philodendron Rio is not actually Philodendron Rio, it's actually just Philodendron Silver Stripe. But I think the two names have been kind of used synonymously because both are, you know, sports of the Philodendron Brasil, and they have the same colors in the variegation, but the variegation does look different. So this is my Philodendron Rio from Gabriella Plants. This is what that variegation looks like. So as you can see, it is silver in the middle, not silver on the edge. So it's silver, cream, dark green. There are some leaves that can like sometimes look like they have a little bit of light green in it, but it's most commonly silver, cream, and dark green. Do you see that? Versus the Silver Stripe, which pretty much always has light green in it and has the silver on the outside. The Rio Sport has the silver on the inside. So that's what that looks like. I'm currently trying to train it up a moss bowl to hopefully get some bigger leaves. Okay, so let me try to hold up my Philodendron Rio and my Philodendron Silver Stripe side by side. So this is the Silver Stripe, this one is the Rio. Okay, I feel like that does actually look quite different. Do you see that? And then do you see what I mean? How like the Rio has the silver in the middle, but the Silver Stripe has the silver kind of like on the outside. There you go. So that's the difference between the two. I think they are both, you know, equally beautiful variegation patterns. And I think that if you really like this type of plant and this variety of plant, it's worth owning both. Okay, so let me put all of these down. Alright, and then if you are still ever confused about all of the different varieties of plants, I'm going to link a handy dandy graphic that Gabriella Plants, the people who created Philodendron Rio, have made to differentiate between their sport cultivars and the other kinds of sport cultivars. So I'll try to put it on the screen right now, and then I'll also make sure to link it down in the description for you. Okay, before I let you go, I guess we should just quickly talk about my care tips for this plant. This is a super easy plant, definitely a beginner's friendly plant. I don't think it asks for too much at all. I water once the plant is completely dry all the way through. So in the summertime for me, that's about once a week-ish, and then in the winter time it's about once every 2 weeks-ish. I've been fertilizing with diluted fish fertilizer, but I'm thinking about changing to a synthetic fertilizer, so I'll get back to you on that. And I pretty much will fertilize it with fish fertilizer year-round, because this plant doesn't really stop growing in the winter time, but I do live in California, so it doesn't really get that cold here. So I feel like people on the East Coast would probably see a bigger difference between summertime growth and wintertime growth than we do here in California. In terms of lighting, it is a low light tolerant plant, but the more intense the variegation, I would say the more light you have to give it. So if you have a Silver Stripe or a Rio, you would definitely want to give that bright and direct lighting to stop it from, you know, ever reverting. Although the variegation pattern is stable, if you don't give the plant all of the lighting needs that it, you know, needs, it will revert to more green in order to help the plant photosynthesize better. So yeah, my Philodendron Brasil and the one that's like the Brasil / cream splashy one, those are both in a very bright east facing window that gets morning light. And then my Philodendron Rio and the other one, the Philodendron Silver Stripe, they're on this plant shelf, and so they get grow light plant, which so far I don't see any complaints from them about that, so they do seem to like that quite a bit. So yeah, those are all of my care tips for that plant. It's honestly like such an easy plant and such a rewarding plant to have inside your home because it grows so fast. Alright, that is all I have for you today. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!